in what I'm calling the post-COVID-19 economy, because we know we are going to be seeing higher unemployment rates. But we also know that some of that wisdom and insight that older people have, that kind of resilience, like we've seen this before, right? We've been through the post 9/11 economy. We've been through crises and economic crises, and can offer a lot of value and insight as businesses are trying to ramp up again when we get out of all of this. So let's go to the next slide. So the first thing that we talk about is, what do we mean by age-friendly? And this is important because from changing the narrative in Colorado's perspective, our goal is never to pit older worker versus younger worker. We see a lot of us versus them language going on, and it's certainly, sadly going on right now in light of the coronavirus. Okay boomer, which is a very much an us versus them, seems to have been replaced now by this boomer. COVID-19 is boomer remover. We want to move away from this. We're all in this together, whether it's this current crisis or whether it is making workforces stronger. So important to know what we mean by age-friendly. And it means that it's accessible to people of all ages, that it's welcoming, so that it accommodates and leverages the strengths and talents of people of all ages. So we know, for example, and we can use currently kind of what's going on. If an older worker has the insight of how do we keep a business going during hard time, and it can be combined with maybe the tech savvy of a younger worker who might say, okay, how are we going to move some of our program offerings and what are we going to do online? The combination of that is going to leave the business stronger. So that's what we mean by age-friendly, is that you're deliberately thinking out, as a business, you're deliberately thinking about, how do we put generations together to make our business stronger, and how do we learn from each other? The reason that I have the traffic light as an example is there's a lot of discussion about age-friendly communities and what makes a community age-friendly. And I know in Jefferson County, you've certainly had a lot of that. The traffic light is like this. A few years ago, my husband had hip replacement surgery. We have lived for a very long time off an intersection near Federal Boulevard in Denver, where and the traffic light is like literally 30 seconds. So he is navigating with the walker across Federal Boulevard, and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to be run over. And what occurred to me at the same time is I had that feeling like 3 decades ago when I had my daughters, and there was a toddler and a baby in a stroller trying to get that intersection. Age-friendly would be changing, getting the city to change the timing on that intersection, and so that it's friendly for, a person with toddler and also for older person who might need some assistance in getting across an intersection. So the concept of age-friendly and age-friendly communities works for people of all ages. The same concept is true for age-friendly workplaces. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So here's what's really interesting to me. One of the things that we know is highly successful in all the literature about effective workplaces is if you have a kind of workplace where you can offer flexible schedules. This is a great thing for people of all ages. So for a student, it can accommodate, classes or something. For, parents of young children, it can accommodate school schedules, childcare schedules, et cetera. And for those of us who are older, it can accommodate the schedules we want to have, the caregiving schedules that we may have. But flexible schedules are something that are highly desired actually across generations. So employers who want to take advantage of this, it's something that, unless it is specific shift work, it's fairly easy to adopt. The interesting thing to me is that the businesses that are ahead of the game right now, as we are, dealing with coronavirus, are the companies who already kind of figured this out, who said, if we can figure out ways for people to work flexibly, if we can figure out ways to work remotely, they already had it in place while everybody else is kind of trying to figure out, how do we make this work now? But this is an example of what we mean when we say age-friendly workplaces are those that adopt the kind of practices that actually attract people of all ages. let's go to the
I
next.
got a question.
Yeah.
You're talking about the value of older workers, and two questions come up. One is age something that an experienced worker should really talk about and talk about the benefits that he or she brings based on his or her age? That's
Yeah.
question one.
Yeah. So question one. So there, this is a sort of it depends. One of the things that is really important. So the fact that I am 67 is of no value to anybody, and to others. To some people may just say, "Get her out of here," right? We know that's true, and we know that's real. Like some studies that were done last year by AARP and the Urban Institute showed that workplace discrimination based on age is real, right? So it's, if you've experienced it, it's not you. This is real. We know that it exists. The way we are trying to reframe it is, and what has been successful so far is, what is, because of that time that you have spent on Earth, what are the things that you have learned? What's the insight that you've gained? And it should never be presented, I'm smarter, than anyone else, or younger. And I've often, as we've done these arguments, very often I've heard some older people say, yeah, I could mop the floor with these younger workers, or I could do this. That is absolutely not the strategy to take. The strategy to take is, and I would say right now, I'm thinking of everything in a post-COVID-19 economy. You think of where are times in your work life where you've had to manage a crisis, where you've been able to organize a team to focus on something. So it's, what you're focusing on is not age itself. What you're focusing on are specific experiences that are relevant to today's time. So if in the post 9/11 economy, you were able to keep a unit or a department going, if you were able to mentor younger people, if you were able to figure out a way for your employer to gain a new contract or something because of this wisdom and experience, absolutely something that you would highlight. So age in and of itself, no. It's, the focus is, what is that wisdom and insight and experience, those strengths that you can only build up over time. One of the things, and my friend Helen Dennis wrote a great article, and let me ask you, CJ, well, can I send you kind of a list of resources that you could get out to everybody on the call?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there was, I had already planned to send certain things, but my friend Helen Dennis, who is kind of a nationally renowned gerontologist, wrote an article last week called "In Successful Aging, These Are Traits That Help Older Adults in a Time of Crisis." And what she talked about was resilience. We've been through a crisis before, so we are not going to totally freak out and run out the door and say, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? We've been through it, and we know that we will get through it, right? We know that that we will get through it, and that life will go on, etc. We know that we have certain insights about what people respond to and don't respond to in a time of crisis, and that can be valuable to a workforce. It can be a calming presence, right? To any workforce. We've got the ability to maybe mentor younger workers who may not have been through that crisis before, because they simply haven't lived that many years. It's not that they're not smart or anything, but they haven't. So they don't know what's going to happen at the end, and we have more of a sense of that. So those are the kind of things, those are the general principles, and what you want to do is come up with the examples that are really specific to you. Like, what are, and again, it may be a time that you were able to adapt your skills and pivot. It may be a time where you were able to mentor other people, that you were able to give advice to the business owner, the department manager, whatever it is, on how to get through something. So those are some examples.
Thanks, Janine. Just one more question while we're sort of on that line. I think you've alluded to it, but the question is, quote, "I seem to be doing a lot of camouflage of my age, 67, in initial phone interviews and resumes, etc. Then the employer sees my age in the first Zoom interview.
Yep.
Should age be camouflaged to get a toe in the door or not?"
So I'm not a big fan of camouflaging age, as you can tell, because I'm like saying, I'm 67. It is what if you, and this is another really strong, it depends. So one of what we're trying to do at Changing the Narrative is we are trying to convince workforce centers, and I know you're already there in Jeffco. We're trying to convince workforce centers and employers that older workers have value. So we hope eventually, and we know we're not there now, we hope to get to a place where no one would feel that they have to camouflage age. So I'm going to be the last person. I'm not, except for dyeing my hair, I do absolutely nothing. And I only dye my hair because I look really horrible gray, and I've, been sort of this reddish brown forever, and I kind of like it. So, and I found a colorist who could match my color. But I don't do anything else. I am what I am. So I think the it depends part of it is if you feel that you can add value, you want to lead with your value, and tie it in the way that we've just suggested before to that experience that you've had. I know people say things like shave years off resume and pretend you're not. That to me, it does fall apart at the first Zoom call unless you're going to get someone to interview for you. So I don't see the value. It was interesting, but I also want to say that I know it's real. A person who did our social media for a while, who is just a little bit younger than me, was someone who, started life, had a family, whatever, never completed college when she was in her, I think, mid 50s. So her resume, which had her graduation rate, her graduation date on it, looked like she was a fairly recent graduate. So she kind of, was brought in for an interview. And then, of course, they looked at her and it was like, well, wait a minute, how could you just have graduated? But she was able to convince them based on her, and it was for a digital media job. And we know that there's such an assumption, right, that only younger people can do digital media. We know that's totally false. But she was able to convince them based on her portfolio that she could actually meet their needs, got hired, and is doing an amazing job.
Great, thanks, Janine.
Okay, anything else? Okay, so let's go to the next slide. So why is it important that employers look at older workers? And this is going to be true even so we know, one of the arguments that we are making that we are not going to be making, like when we come out of this, we were out there telling employers, look, you can't, we've got a 1 to 2% unemployment rate depending on the city, and therefore, this is something that you ought to look at older workers because you've got this unemployment rate and you can't find workers. Now we know that is not going to be true when we come out of this, right? So but certain fundamentals are still true. Fundamentally, the talent pipeline has got to change. This particular chart from the US Census Bureau shows, if you look on the left-hand side, shows the way the world looked like in 1960. And you can see at the bottom, you've got a pyramid shape, right? And at the bottom, you have a whole lot of younger people tapering up to a very small number of older people. In 2060, on the right hand of the chart, you see we move to column, right? And this is true around the world, that we have a fundamental demographic shift, and that is a result of a number of things. One of it is people living longer. And then the second, if you want to go to the next slide, CJ, is that we've had a dramatically declining birth rate, not only in this country, but around the world, in both developing and developed countries. You can see something that population analysts call replacement fertility rate, 2,100 births per 1,000 women. In the US in 2017, it was 1,765 was the number of births. And then Colorado was the 1,630. So you see, if you look at this kind of little chart on the left-hand side, you see this kind of declining birth rate, right? So we're never going, as people just keep saying, we've got to find younger workers, they're not going to have over time, not immediately when we're emerging from the crisis. And I think it's important to differentiate that. But over time, any company that simply looks for younger workers is going to be at a disadvantage, one, because they won't have the advantage of wisdom and experience, and there are not going to be enough younger workers. That's just kind of the trend over time. Let's go to the next slide. So the long-term implications of this are that current talent pipelines, and talent pipelines are basically, how businesses, how organizations fill talent that they have. Current and future talent pipelines are going to need every generation. That we can't have this sort of mindset and thinking. If we do a more appealing ad, we're going to get more younger people and more younger people and more younger people. That's not going to be sufficient. And you were starting to see that before we went into this crisis of more and more companies specifically targeting and going after older workers. One of the resources that I will share with you is a resource guide that lists specifically job sites and companies specifically who are interested in recruiting older workers, and specifically workers age 50 plus, because those companies have already realized that they're not going to fill their talent pipeline simply with the younger people. So they're understanding the value proposition of older. But even if you understand as a company a value proposition or not, this is kind of demography, and this is the direction that we're going. Next. So here's overall, and this is really answering the question that one of you raised earlier. So here's how we've positioned older workers. We have talked about their wisdom, the experience that you build up over time, resilience. I like this quote by Maya Angelou, and I was preparing this presentation, so this is actually on our Facebook and LinkedIn page today. And a quote by Maya Angelou: I love that I know a little more today than I did yesterday, or I simply know it more profoundly. So I'm going to ask you, here's another interactive portion, chat in, if you will. What is something you know today that you didn't know a year ago? And if you can, make it workforce related, because we all have learned things in the last month, like where to get groceries, how long the lines are going to be. Let's not make it about that. Something that you know today, maybe work related. And I know all of you have just been in this wonderful program that Jeff Coe puts on. So maybe something you learned through that program. And if you would chat in the response. And then CJ, as you see them, maybe you can read them aloud.
Absolutely.
All right, what do we got?
Got a silence. We've got silence. Oh, so they were asking the question again. So if you'll repeat the question again, Janine.
It should be on everybody's screen. What is something you know today that you did not know a year ago? So I will, I'll give an example. One of the things, and this was actually one of my New Year resolutions. I wish it did not take coronavirus to have me realize it. One of my New Year resolution was to learn Zoom, because I wanted to do more virtual presentations. So today, I know how to use Zoom. I did not know how to do that a year ago. So anybody, just chat in a response.
So one of the questions was, I know more about computers than I did.
Terrific. Okay. And that's going to be anything that we in the area of tech for all of us is going to be really important, because we know that one of the things about the economy is going to be it's going to be more remote and more. This isn't going to go away. That part of it. Anything else?
I discovered that everyone can work remotely.
Right? Because remember, so many of us thought we couldn't, and then I'm set up now. Both my husband and I are working remotely, so I actually had a home office, which became, as my daughters kind of moved out of the house, I call it the family junk room, and I may have to clean it out. But so I'm working on our kitchen counter, and he's working in kind of the front living room, and we close the door and are on online chats all day.
So someone else discovered Grammarly.
Oh, isn't Grammarly the best? Yes. Yeah. What else?
Knowing the importance of storytelling about intangibles and accomplishments on a resume.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so see, we've all learned something, and I want you to keep this in mind. this is the positioning, I think, for older workers. It's not the fact that we are older in and of ourselves. It is the fact that we have accumulated this wisdom and experience. So if each one of us who's on this webinar now knows something today that we didn't know a year ago, and multiply that over time, right? That's value. And it's not just a skill, but it's also insight. Anyone can learn a skill. I've learned Zoom literally in the last 2 weeks. And anybody, and not only that, I'm like teaching it to all my siblings and my friends to say, because we're gonna meet by Zoom. But there are other insights. I can go back. I was giving, some advice to my former consulting firm of saying, okay, here are the kind of things that we did in post 9/11. We assured everybody they were going to be okay. We did, we did special trainings to how do you raise money in an economy where, people are being laid off and that kind of thing. So, but that's an insight, some of the people there didn't have because they were not doing this work in that post 9/11. That's the difference to me between learning a skill, which all of us can do, but also in what insight and experience tells you. Okay, anything else?
I've got two more. This
Yeah.
one I love. I think older workers are believing in themselves more.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Fantastic. I am delighted to hear that. I'm delighted to hear that because I think we do. There's so much value that we bring, and we need to kind of show that and not apologize for being older. I don't think we have to be arrogant about it, like, oh, we are so smart, etc. Even if we believe that about ourselves, but I think we can, just show that here's how we can help. Here's how we can help. That to me is the approach.
And here's another one. I've learned not to overcomplicate my resume with too much information.
Okay, these are great things. I feel like, CJ, I think when we're done, you should copy all of these things in the chat and get that out to everybody as well. So they're all good tips and reminders for us.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I want to be mindful of time, and I'm looking, let's go to the next slide because we're going to do some more questions at the end. So these are really important. Another thing, and I will be sharing this with all of you in the links that I sent to CJ. We compiled all the research into a four-page business case briefing. And I think this is something useful for all of you as you're kind of going out again to read so that you kind of understand this isn't just us making this up and changing the narrative. There's research behind all of this. Some of the research shows these benefits of mixed age team. So one, it offers a company the opportunity for reciprocal mentoring. So the example that I gave earlier, okay, right now we're kind of in a crisis economy and people are trying to figure out, what do I do? Older worker can provide some insight on having navigated what are some successful practices in navigating through crises before. A younger person who may have been taught the technology or playing around with it can show the older people on staff, here's how we're going to go online. Here's how we're going to migrate some of our content, et cetera, online. So that's an example of reciprocal mentoring. The research shows that having mixed age team improves team problem solving and creativity. So one of the things a friend of mine likes to say is, if we look under the table and we look at everybody's shoes, now I'm not sure we're gonna have to figure out how to do that virtually, right? But if we look at everybody's shoes and we're all wearing the same pair, we're two alike, right? We don't have enough different perspectives in order to have that creativity that's needed for team problem solving. So bringing those different perspectives, it's the same that is true around gender and race, ethnicity. The same is true of age. If we bring those different perspectives in, it helps the organization with problem solving and creativity. We know that knowledge transfer is really, really important. So the worst thing for a company is when everybody of a certain age who held that institutional knowledge leaves at the same time. And, we've talked to companies about why that's, having mandated retirement or, pushing out a whole group just doesn't make sense, because then you've got other people that are kind of sitting around and saying, well, we'd love to do this and we think we have the skills, but we really kind of don't know how. And we don't know what you've tried before. So the smart companies have been figuring out programs like phased retirement and how do we make accommodations. Remember what I said earlier about age-friendly workplaces and the need for accommodation. How do we make accommodations to keep older workers on so they can be mentoring younger workers? A great example, companies that have done that in Germany. So, for example, BMW invested as little as, I think it was 40,000 euro. Don't quote me on that, but I'll send you an article about it. But to totally retrofit their factory, because they realized if the older workers who built these amazing cars all left, that the company would be in a world of hurt. So what they did instead is they went to the older workers and they said, so what would keep you staying on and working side by side with the younger worker? And people had really simple solutions, like if I didn't have to stand all day on the assembly line and you had a tall stool, or if you did this or you did that, I'd stay on. And that's what they did. And it was a very relatively small investment. So those are the kind of things that we're talking to companies about. But finally, and I think most importantly, are those last two. Note that they are highlighted in green. What we know is that companies who not just have mixed age. So it doesn't do a company any good if you've got older worker here sitting in a cubicle and younger worker here, and there's no interaction. But the companies who deliberately try to leverage the benefits of each experience increased productivity, and for-profit companies, certainly important, increased profitability. So those are some of the benefits that we talk about. Let's go to the next slide. So another thing, though, then we have some real talk with the companies, and we say, so what gets in the way of leveraging these benefits? And I think it's important to acknowledge. Now, I don't think that this is what you would be talking about if you're going out and looking for work, but we're trying to create the climate so that as older workers are looking for work, are looking to be able to stay on, looking to be retrained, that employers are receptive. So that's our role at changing the narrative. So we talk about zero-sum thinking, this whole idea of older worker versus younger worker, which is ridiculous. There are, and actually a friend of mine said this, and I got really upset with her. She was like, well, Janine, I love this thing you're doing with older workers, but if older workers stay in the workforce, aren't we taking jobs away from younger workers? And actually, all the reputable economic studies that have looked at that have said, no, actually, that's not true. That's zero-sum thinking. We know that when older workers stay in the workforce, it generally creates more economic activity, and that's going to be especially important, right, as we emerge from our current situation. So we encourage them to reject that kind of thinking. There are a lot of practices and policies that have been rooted in the past. They're back to the time when average longevity was, under age 65. So, what I like to talk about is when Social Security was invented, it was in 1935 in response to a crisis that company, so a great example of government doing good. But retirement age then was set at age 65, and average longevity for both men and women was under age 63, right? So we've got these things that are, normal retirement age was therefore kind of benchmarked at that. And we know now that, people are living into their 80s. So does it make sense to call normal retirement age at age 65, especially if you're feeling healthy, well, et cetera? There's this term federal government has used, prime working age. Prime working age is defined as ages 25 to 54. Again, every time those kind of terms are used, they create this kind of mindset. And so we just encourage people to move away from that. And finally, we talk about assumptions and stereotypes. And we're going to go through some of those now. Let's go to the next slide. So here, and this is, I apologize for the really little print, because at least it's looking that way on my screen. And I don't know if you're seeing it on a full screen, but all of these are also in the business case briefing that we're going to share with you. So one of the stereotypes, right? We cost too much. Now, that may on some level seem smart. If you've been in the same company and have worked there for a long time, you probably have made more money. But what's important for any company, and it's especially going to be important as we emerge, is they've got to have the best talent available. So we encourage companies, you've got to do a cost benefit analysis of what does it look like? What is the, what does that older worker bring? Are there things that they can maybe get done more efficiently and do well? And also look at kind of turnover and retraining cost. The other thing is encouraging companies, and I know that's considered a best practice now, to post positions with salary levels. And if the older worker is coming in and saying, I'm perfectly happy accepting that salary level. And here's why this makes sense for me right now of not, that kind of eliminates that argument. There is this mythology about older workers not being willing to learn new things. And how we refute it is by thinking about, before we go into interviews, that question that I posed earlier, what are things that you know now that you didn't know a year ago? But then you kind of broaden that right over your career. The research actually shows that older workers not only want to learn, they're motivated to exceed expectations and have better communications and soft skills. And we know how important soft skills are, especially now. And we have these better, and this is a perfect example of, to me, the wisdom that you gain over time. If we have better communications and soft skills, it's probably because we've made so many mistakes over our lifetime. Now, don't say that in your interview, but those are the kind of things, we've learned things over time, and so we have those better skills, and that's what the research shows. There are some people who will say, well, there's, and this is an assumption. So somebody asked at the beginning, about assumptions made on age. These are all assumptions. Assumptions are that their skills are not up to date. Now, there's a really interesting irony in this, to me. I think it was an AARP study that showed that very often when professional development opportunities are made available to employees of a company, they're less likely to be made available to older workers because there's an assumption that they won't be sticking around, which is actually not true. If you look at our next thing, older workers are not only loyal, they stay at a job, the research shows, on average, 4 times longer than younger workers. This, again, is not to bash younger workers. It's simply that, when you're younger, you tend to move around more, you may get married, you move cities, you go to school, whatever it is. But on average, the research shows that we're more loyal. The solution to that, also, this whole skill not up to date, is for what we encourage companies to do is use skill-based assessments to make sure they're providing training, looking at things. And this is, to me, where workforce centers are so important, and the entire Colorado Workforce Development Council, the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, plays such a vital role, is making sure that there are training programs that are in skills training or programs that are available to people all ages, looking at things like with community college systems, like alternative credentials. But the most important thing, the implication for all of us right now, I would say, is make sure that we're doing what we can during this sort of time where we're sheltering in place to take kind of those online courses, making sure that we are training up on some skill that is going to be vital as we emerge. And my personal feeling and suggestion is that those skills are, like, all of us should know how to use Zoom, not just how to log in, but we should know how to do all the controls post a Zoom meeting. We should know how to facilitate productive workplace conversations virtually and remotely, because I think that part, somebody said, I think in the chat, we've learned how to work remotely. I think that is going to be, for the most part, the new normal in many industries. So it's incumbent on us as well, as older people, to make sure that our skills are up to date. And then on a policy systems level, what we do at Changing the Narrative is call for workforce centers and any kind of training facility to make sure that older people are very much included in workforce development and training programs. All right, let's go to next slide. So here's what we encourage employers to do. And this is kind of part of our pitch. Include age in company diversity policies. So what was really interesting to us when we looked at the research is, of companies that have diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, a study by AARP showed only 8% of them include age, right? So we're really pushing companies and saying, if you really want the benefits of diversity in your workforce, you need to include age. To train HR managers in implicit bias, so they don't fall over when you've looked great on their resume, and then you get on Zoom and they're like, oh my God, older person. One of the things the research shows is if HR managers are trained in implicit bias, and that's bias that we all have that we're not even consciously aware of, right? Because of basically experiences that we've absorbed over time. And actually, research shows that older people ourselves are some of the most biased against ourselves, right? We've had a lot of years to absorb the message that aging is not okay. So we have that implicit bias ourselves. But we know the research also shows that when we train HR managers, they're much less likely to act on it. remove age identifiers from applications. So this to me is, if Colorado could remove the box for ex-offenders, why can't we just stop asking on applications high school graduation date? So that's kind of because high school, we know that it's illegal to ask someone their age, but we know that it's not illegal to ask high school graduation date. So it's sort of it's a proxy, right, for asking. So I think all of us should be championing, let's remove age identifiers from applications. We encourage employers to use skill-based assessments. So if somebody wants someone who is very good at digital media, they shouldn't look at me, Janine Vanderburg, and say, oh, she's 67, she probably doesn't know how to do it. Instead, they should look at, I was able to ramp up, by 2,000% social media presence on changing the narrative in December 2019. That might be a relevant stat, right? And I know how to do it. They should not look at me and simply make the assumption, older person, oh, not digitally competent. Redesigning workplaces, I think, is relevant for some. So certainly in kind of manufacturing, but even in retail and some service industries, that's the BMW example. Asking older workers, what can we do to make sure that we can keep you on? Investing in training and upskilling older workers is one of the things we're advocating that companies do. So when they have their training programs, making sure that they're not just making them open to younger workers. We've already talked about flexibility and time and location. Now, the good news is, I think this is going to happen. I'm so awful at like remembering those. It's sort of like, shutting the barn door after the horses left or something like that. But I don't think there's going to be the ability, now that people have realized that we can work remotely, to go back and insist that everybody sit on the desk. And not only that, I think that smart companies are going to realize, wow, people were more productive. And by the way, we kind of saved a lot of money on office space. So maybe we need to kind of think about that. Encouraging reciprocal membership. And then this is one where, talk about having a pivot. Right before all of this hit with the current situation, we, Changing the Narrative in Colorado, had entered into an agreement with the National Age-Friendly Foundation to help employers in Colorado become certified age-friendly employers. And what it was going to involve was going in person and kind of doing a relatively brief assessment of what their employment practices were, how they work, and that's from kind of recruitment, how the job is structured, to opportunities for staff development, et cetera, all of that sort of thing. Obviously, we are not going, and there was a story in the Denver Post about this, and we actually got a number of calls. So the good news is that there were employers who were responding to the message that older workers bring value. So there was a story in the Denver Post about this, and I'll send the link again to CJ about, if you want to attract older workers and become certified as an age-friendly employer, here's what you do. I think within a day, we had 12 employers reach out to us. And of course, and this literally happened right before the whole coronavirus thing kind of hit, with all of the put a halt on everything. So the good news for us is we know that employers are interested in this and in gaining the benefits of older workers. The bad news is, obviously, we are not going into employers right now. We know that what employers right now are interested is in, staying in business and how they're going to weather this. But this is something we're looking forward to picking up. And basically, you'll be able to go on our website and find those employers who are interested in being age-friendly. Let's go to the next slide. So I call this the pivot. We're all having a pivot, right? Right now. I think the pivot that you can make to get ready for this kind of the post COVID-19 economy, or this one, is to really look at, and I'm realizing that you probably have covered this as well in the training that you went through with Jeffco. Really looking at who are the industries that are going to need your skills. So thinking of less that I work in this particular industry, but here are the skills that I have, and who's going to need the skills in this post-COVID-19 economy. So certainly anything involving technology, telecommunications, as we make this shift to more virtual work. Certainly opportunities in healthcare, but that doesn't necessarily mean having to be a frontline provider. It can be, who are the companies that are going to have more demand, who are growing, and how can you use your set of skills in those? I call this learning all the tech. So and what I mean by that is, do you need to become a programmer? No, but do you need to know all the tech that is going to be used in this. So knowing how to convene people remotely, knowing how to use platforms like Zoom and WebEx, knowing how to use remote project management tools, so that you're fully poised and you can go in and say, I can manage a team remotely. Here's the work that I can do from home. I know how to convene people. It's not, I just know how to join the meeting. It's, I know how to manage the meeting. I know how to show the slides. I know how to follow up with people, etc. I'm calling this a compile a project portfolio, and it's kind of a look back at what are specific projects or things that you have done that reflect the wisdom that you've gained over time. So that are going to be useful in this post COVID-19 economy. So whether it's managing through, excuse me for a moment, whether it's managing through risky situations, whether it's being flexible and willing to pivot, whether it's being able to figure out how to do new things creatively, maybe on a reduced budget, any of those kind of things, kind of put them in your own project portfolio. And you want to make sure that those are laid into your resume, certainly into your LinkedIn profile and that kind of thing. If you are not sure, if you are currently not working and you're like, okay, how do I, when is this going to come out, all of this? Don't just sit back, do volunteer work. There are a lot of opportunities right now for virtual volunteering. I will share with you another, this is going to be a blog link. A lot of it is how to stay occupied while we're sheltering in place, but there's a specific section on virtual volunteering. Look for an opportunity that gives you an opportunity to build up some skill, right, while we are sheltering at home, because obviously it's a little bit harder to build up that portfolio while we're all in shelter in place orders. Do gig work. There are, again, there's this particular website, Flex Jobs, there's Upwork. Figure out how your skills can be used in some gig work. So you've got, if you're currently unemployed, you've got some projects and things that you can show, here's what I did, and that can be added to your project portfolio. I think it ends with, there is a man named Chip Conley who ran some kind of boutique hotel chain, and he has coined the term modern elder. He wrote a book on this topic called The Wisdom of Elders. So if you find yourself with some time to read, either download an ebook, figure out a way to get hold of this book called Modern Elder, because I think it will, one, give you a lot of confidence. It will inspire you. I know it inspired me to think about how the wisdom that I gained over time isn't just a set of outdated skills. It's things that I've learned that can help another generation of people or multiple generations of people think of how they approach work as we go into kind of this time of uncertainty. But elements of the modern elder are, what Chip Conley did is he took the advice of and everything that he had learned from running this boutique hotel firm, and he did it to kind of upgrade. He ended up in some position with Airbnb to kind of upgrade how Airbnb thought of itself from people renting homes to really a hospitality service, et cetera. They probably need for him to come back right now, right, to pivot as we're going through all of this. But think of the things that you've done that you can position yourself as a modern elder. So I think if we go to the next question, we're ending just about when we had planned to with time for questions. So CJ, I think this should be a question slide. Chat in your questions. It is. I love it when that happens, especially when I'm not near a printer. So I realize the downside of being in office is I actually don't have a home printer that works. Something I've got to do.
So this is a great time, as Janine said. Any questions that you have? Well, people are contemplating that. Janine, just to redo, is the book by Chip Conley Elements of a Modern Elder, or?
No, it's called, I'm going to run out while people do, I think I've got it in the next room. I'm going to go grab it and hold it up. I think it's called Wisdom of Elders, but I'm not sure.
Perfect. So again, please feel free to chat in any of your questions. Janine's a wealth of information, as you've witnessed this morning. So don't be shy. Chat away.
Okay, so I realized that's one of the things I have at my office that's going to have to come home. I believe it's called The Wisdom of Elders, but I will send that in the links I sent to you, CJ, to get out to people.
Perfect. So I do have a couple, some comments and some questions. Um, Someone has suggested that showing that we are healthy and fit goes a long way towards squashing the potential age-related issues.
Yeah. So here's the so yes, however, I think we need to be careful about that so that we're not also um, engendering ableism, right? I mean, to me, it ought to be, and I mean, in general, we know that older people are, healthier than they used to be, have increased longevity. But we also, in the same way that in putting forward the case for the older worker, we don't want to diminish younger people. We don't want to diminish people with disabilities either. So it's just, I think it's important to be careful about that and how we talk about that. I think it's more kind of like ability to do the work, skills, wisdom, and experience, so that we're not, the umbrella term that we use is we never want to engender us versus them, because it also is important for people with disabilities who are well capable of working and working longer, to be able to do that as well. So we don't want to say anything as we are talking about the older worker that would create a division, if that makes sense.
Question is, I think a few people were not able to connect quite as quickly. So can you share again the name of your company?
Changing the narrative in Colorado.
Perfect.
And actually, there will be a last slide on this that has a link to our website and that kind of thing.
Excellent. So another question is, any experience with consulting and not losing state income-based benefits? So if somebody, it's that question about, um, you're doing consulting work, are you making more than you should based on some of the public assistance you might get or something like that?
I think that's always a danger. I mean, I think that's always a danger. If you're honest about your income, that's, a danger. So I think the experience is, yes, that's real. Not helpful, but that's real.
So I wanted to just thank you for talking about that virtual volunteering. We oftentimes forget that there is an opportunity to upskill and to spiff up our resume with some of those volunteer efforts. And I love the fact that you mentioned that there is that opportunity right now while we're all sheltered in place to do some really creative and innovative things that would add to our marketability.
Absolutely. Anything else?
I don't see any more questions at the moment.
Okay. So if you want to go to the next slide, I'll just.
So actually, Janine, I lied. I have a question.
Okay.
So, because I've had the pleasure of hearing you speak on several occasions, I guess my question is, how do we as individuals join this changing the narrative? What are the things that we might do to promote ourselves in the event that you haven't gotten to that company yet? And just the things that we could do just among ourselves. You've mentioned a few tips
Right.
about, the boomer remover and boomer okay, and
I know.
we might just say in a conversation that we could help ourselves change the narrative,
Right.
and we could certainly do so with companies.
Yeah. So let me suggest a couple of things. The one, if you're involved in Workforce Center, and I'm happy at any point to do basically kind of like a little variation of this, specifically for people in workforce centers, of here's how you talk to companies about older workers. So I think anybody in a workforce center, and that was actually one of our goals for this year, which we've got to figure out now how to do virtually. So CJ, I was thrilled when you reached out. One of our goals was to basically go out to every workforce center and make sure that everybody working in a workforce center is equipped how to talk about older workers, right? Because if we're all putting that message out, because we know that very often employers are looking to you as workforce centers to to basically source employees, right? So the more that you can make the business case, right, the better off we all are. So that's, I think, if you're workforce center staff kind of on this webinar. As older people, we've got to stop diminishing ourselves. Like, we have to stop saying things like having a senior moment. Stop it. And we've got to tell our friends to stop it. We have a separate workshop that we call Ending Ageism Together. It's geared to those of us who are older, who have internalized ageism. We are moving some of those virtually. I have a call this afternoon about how we're going to do that. And if you, I will send a link where you can sign up for our mailing list, and then you'll get a notice of when these things are occurring. But there are a number of things we need to stop it among ourselves. We need to stop thinking things like, and senior moment to me is a great example. We say things like, I'm having a senior moment because we've just heard that term. And we haven't thought about, wow, maybe there's a lot on my mind right now. Maybe because I've accumulated all this wisdom and insight, sometimes I can't immediately pull it back right away, and that kind of thing. So we need to stop using ageist terms. We need to stop and track when other people say it. So, if our friends are making fun of themselves and whatever, I've just started saying, stop doing that. Did you know that, we're contributing to ourselves. We need to stop saying things like, oh, I'm too old to learn that. Nonsense. And I will give you, this is a great kind of coronavirus example. So we came back from Tulsa, Oklahoma. My father-in-law died about 3 weeks ago. And so the good news was we were there. We were able to be there with my mother-in-law. The bad news was, like, the kind of shelter-in-place stuff had just started. I had to get on a plane back to Denver, and I was totally freaked out. I'm like, ugh. And then we came back, and I had been looking forward to this lovely family and friends dinner for my birthday, and we couldn't do that, right? Because they were shelter in place. So I scheduled a Zoom webinar with a group of friends who were also having birthdays that week. And it was basically a Zoom, let's celebrate our birthdays happy hour. Not one of them had used Zoom, right? But we all figured out how to do it. And we had this lovely time. And then I scheduled something with my siblings back east, and then I scheduled something back with my in-laws to check in with them and that kind of thing. And every single person involved in all of this was someone who was age 65 or over who had never used Zoom before, right? So we need to stop saying, and everybody navigated and they were able to figure it out because we sent instructions ahead of time. We had people practice so we could spend our time together. So we need to stop the stereotypes that we hold about ourselves, and because the more we hold them about ourselves and we put it out there, that cumulatively, right, makes its way to employers. So we need to be just saying, hey, we got this, we can figure it out. That was a long-winded answer to your short questions, CJ.
Okay, I do have some other questions. So someone's asking, with resumes being scaled back to, just show your employment history of maybe 10 years, should cover letters address the benefits, address age and the benefits to educate the HR screener?
I think, to me, okay, and this is, now I'm putting on my hat as a longtime employer and someone who did search as part of what we did our company at Joining Vision and Action for some of our clients. Cover letter is, to me, and you all know this, you've just been through this program. Cover letter is about how you can help that particular person, how you're set. So it's not, I'm older, I'm trying to educate HR people. No, let us educate HR people. Let the workforce centers educate HR people. Goal of cover letter is to demonstrate why your age is a benefit. So not to say, I'm 67 and therefore I know a lot of stuff. It's to say, I'm totally making this up, so it's going to be incoherent because I haven't thought about it ahead of time. It's to say, during the post 9/11 crisis, I was able to, and this is a nonprofit example, I was able to increase the revenue of our nonprofit clients by X% because I realized what they would need, how they would need to be communicated with, et cetera. And I can bring that talent now to making sure you, nonprofit organization, can not only retain your donors, but have them give you more time. That's the cover letter. It's not, I'm 67 and I've been fundraising forever. It's, here's what I learned. Here's the wisdom. Here's how I can apply it to your need to keep revenue growing during this time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks, Janine. Another couple questions. You mentioned a national age-friendly employer initiative. Are there other programs that modern elders have access to help the workers seeking employment?
Yeah. So I'm going to be sending you a resource guide, and in the resource guide, there is, so for example, there is there's a job, there are a couple of job boards, like one is called retirement jobs. There are a couple of others, but obviously they are geared to they're geared to employers who want the 50 plus employers. So those are good places to start. I can send you a link to kind of like Age Friendly Foundation, et cetera. And then there are examples of a couple of companies. So for example, I think the company's name is called Wave, but they basically have built a platform of specifically using the wisdom and experience of older people, I think in accounting and insurance, in kind of things that can be done remotely and behind the scenes, and specifically geared at older workers. And the beauty of that is, if a business needs somebody to do their accounting and you can do their accounting, they really don't care how old you are. And what this woman did, the person who put Wave together, that I thought was so brilliant, is she figured that out, that there were places where she pre-screens people, she makes sure they have the skills, then she gives the employer 3 options, but all 3 of the options are people who are age 50 and over, right? So if you have that set of skills, but that I believe is in our resource guide.
Great. So Janine, I'm going to take this one if you don't mind. It says,
Yeah.
where to get training in hosting Zoom and WebEx, etc. As Janine said, she's learned Zoom in a short period of time, as have many of us. But simply going to the zoom.us, they have some great tutorials that you don't even have to sign up. You can just take tutorials, very, very nice step-by-step suggestions. WebEx, which we're using today, sadly, in my estimation, this is my own personal opinion, is not quite as intuitive. But once you learn Zoom, the tools on many of these platforms are similar. It's just a matter of understanding each of their little nuances for that. So, and then another one for you, Janine, it says, as a air quotes, older worker, I'm not up to par in technology skills as younger workers. Are there any links or advice you could share to get up to speed?
So I would think that the Workforce Center probably can give you kind of more direction into where you can get up to speed. But I mean, to me, the basics are, you certainly need to use the basics of Office. And I think for a while we were directing people to kind of public libraries. Public libraries are closed now, but I think some of them have still virtual programs. There are a number of kind of like great courses kind of thing that are open right now. And I think it's an attempt by these different course providers to do good during this time, recognizing that people are sheltering in place. This is, if you will, a great time to learn a new skill, because most of us have probably more time than we had planned. I think learning Zoom is critical because it's popping up everywhere. I mean, people who a month ago, when I suggested let's have a Zoom meeting, said Zoom what, are now everybody's doing everything on Zoom. So I would highly, highly recommend what CJ said, going to the Zoom US and going through all the tutorials. So I think Microsoft Office, Zoom, and learning at least a couple of those online project management systems, whether it's Asana, Basecamp, that kind of thing, because I think a lot of that is going to be happening online. Being familiar with the whole kind of Google platform, so using Google Drive. I was, before I started changing the narrative, I was adjunct faculty at Metropolitan State University of Denver, and was also redoing their kind of nonprofit curriculum program. And we went out to employers in the area and we asked them, what do you wish that people most knew how to use? And they said, use the Google platform, because so many of us are on it. We share documents that way, et cetera. And they were kind of stunned at the number of employees of all ages, but especially younger people who are coming out of college and not knowing how to use Google. So anything you can do to use, learn the Google platform, which is pretty simple. And if you've used Office, pretty simple and straightforward. But it's just the most important thing is use this time to do it, whatever, and maybe just chunk one at a time. Figure out how to use Zoom. If you haven't used Office before, go ahead and use it. But the last thing that you want to go into an employer say is, we don't know how to use tech skills, or be the person who's always saying, can you show me how to do it? I mean, this is like the different time that we're going to go into, because the expectation is going to be, I believe, that people are able to work remotely.
And a couple, one of our colleagues mentioned that another resource is GCF Learn Free. That's a site that you can get on for learning new technology, etc. The last question is about the Zoom security issue, and there are a couple patches out there that you can take when you set up your own account. You can go in and make certain that you're going to settings and asking for any of the updates. The issue.
Oh, and let me just add one thing. If you simply Google, quote, Zoom bombing, there are a number of people who in the last week have put together, here's the step-by-step of how you can make your Zoom meeting secure. So I know a lot of people, are sharing all these articles, oh my God, security. And I'm like, there are workarounds. They have done the patch update, but there are also a lot of things that you can do, and you just want to be aware of them.
Absolutely. Well, we are right at 10:45. Janine, you're amazing to get right on that dot. I just wanted to thank you, but also to give you anything else that you wanted to provide to the group before we close up.
Yeah, I just, I think what I want to say is this. I think as we emerge from this, that companies, organizations, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, government, whatever it is, are going to need the talent and wisdom of older people more than ever. And so what all of us can be doing now is, one, preparing ourselves for it as individuals, but also putting forward the message that older people are of value. The thing that I worry about the most right now, because of the language around coronavirus, is that older people, after all of these attempts that we've been putting forward to say older people have value to our communities, to our workplaces, all of a sudden there's a lot of COVID-19 language about we are weak, we're vulnerable, and we need to push through that and just say, no, we know that older people in certain age groups and certain comorbidity are at higher risk of surrounding coronavirus, but that does not make us as a population weak and vulnerable and not able to do things. So I think all of us need to assert that in any platform and opportunity that we have, with friends, with colleagues, with our dogs if we're sheltering at home. I'm telling my dog all the time before she gets a biscuit, we are valuable. Remember that. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Janine.
Okay, thanks so much. CJ, thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you spending time with us, and love the message. So no more senior moments. No more senior moments. We're going to rock.
We can do it.
We're all
we can do
stars.
it. We can do it. Okay, take care, you all. Stay safe. Be well. So we're in this together.
Information out to you.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Bye.
Great day.